All right. I don't know who'd want to listen to this, but how many of you drink bubbly? Do you ever see this in the stores?
Yeah.
You do?
Buble.
Booblades, booblades.
Buble. You know what? I like it because it's basically just water. It's better than drinking pop, that's for sure. And not that it matters. There's nothing in it except water and flavors, but it actually is COR. It has a Hefstra on it.
Oh, well.
Marshall, are there any calories in it?
Zero calories.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with water and soda stream?
Okay, so I have a soda stream
I don't like.
downstairs, and soda stream is wonderful. The only thing about soda stream is crazy. It's good for the environment, but it's more expensive than buying a case of bubbly.
Yes.
So I was
Marshall.
trying it, and the soda stream cartridges for the air cartridges, I worked it out, cost a lot more than just buying a case of the bubbly.
Better to buy
It's
yourself
flat.
a piece of beer.
A case of beer.
Yes, much better than the bubbly.
So I have a beer. I have a beer that you can drink in the daytime and you won't get drunk. You can have 10 of them. It's called Partake, and there's no alcohol.
Then it's no good.
Oh, okay. All right. So last time we were talking about the zooming on the Seder, and is it allowed and is it not allowed?
Sure.
And we're just going to recap that because there's a few pieces of the puzzle that we didn't finish up with. And I want to tell you where this whole thing leads to, where this whole thing goes, because it seems to go in circles. You can't do this, you can't do that. This guy says it's lenient. This rabbi says it's strict. They try and find a position. And then they say, well, follow whoever your rabbi says to follow. So there's the issues of timers, which we talked a little bit about, how you could set a timer in motion before Shabbat for certain things, which we're going to finish up with today. So in other words, you can set a timer for lights, oddly enough, to come on, but you can't set a timer on for a radio, let's say, to come on in Shabbat or Yontif. I always find that.
Marshall, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, you're going to explain certain things about Zooming and whatever, but if I didn't ask whether you could or not, am I bound by what you say?
Oh, good one.
No.
He's not a rabbi.
No, it's not about I'm not a rabbi. If a rabbi is in a class and he's teaching you something and you learn it, nobody says you have to follow it. But if you ask a rabbi a question and say, am I allowed to do this? The rabbi has the answer. Once he gives you the answer, you're not allowed to shop for another answer from another rabbi. So if you say to me, can I flip a light on Shabbat? The answer is, well, it's a rabbinic violation. It's not a Torah violation, but it's certainly a rabbinic violation. If you say, do we as a people turn lights on Shabbat? The answer is, well, some people do and some people don't. This is what the laws are. I'm teaching what the laws are and where they come from. What you choose to do in your own life is different. If you go to a rabbi, and I did this often, when I have a real halachic question for Toronto, I go to Rabbi Elisha Shochet. And I call up Rabbi Shochet, and I said to him, there's a wedding coming up, and this is the situation. Can I do that? And he'll say to me, you don't want the answer. Because if I tell you the answer, so then he goes like this, goodbye, and he hangs up. Now, sometimes he says, do you really want to know the answer? Because he knows that I'll respect him. And I'll say, yes, in this case, I really want to know. And then he'll tell me, and I realize the reason I was probably asking the question is because I already know you can't do it. So, if you go to a rabbi and you ask a specific question, you say, am I allowed to go to a hospital where they serve non-kosher food because that hospital doesn't have any way of getting any kosher food, and I need to have my eye surgery at that hospital? They have a doctor there that can perform this surgery. Nobody else knows how to perform that surgery. And I'm going to be there for 4 days. Can I eat the food while I'm there? Well, the answer is yes. The stringent Orthodox rabbis will say 100%. You go there to save your eyesight and you eat the non-kosher food. And then they finish off by saying, but eat less than you would normally eat. Try and pick some things that you would, that's what they say. Try to, if you would eat a whole piece of bread and the bread's not kosher, eat a smaller piece of, you'll avoid the meat, of course, and you'll pick a little bit from the fish. And you'll have, so what they're saying is that, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to talk about, not today, but later on in other lectures, we're going to be visiting, at the end of this series, we're going to visit, because it's technology, artificial insemination. That's coming later. And the halachic standards. But the issue of, in technology, when you go into medical ethics, the rabbis asked, there's a question, a rabbi was asked, what is the rule on pekuach nefesh, on saving a life? When can I break Shabbos? How do you break Shabbos? You know, I want to break Shabbos because I have to save, somebody's sick. We all know if somebody's sick, you run to the hospital, you drive, you do whatever you can. It's important to save somebody. But how do they decide what you do to save somebody? So the answer is, the rabbis first said, when your whole body is sick, the whole body, meaning if you had a flu, your whole body could be shaking with shivers and it's affecting your whole body. Then you can go and you can break Shabbat and you violate it and you go and get help and you go to the hospital. What happens if it's only a little part of your body? You have a headache, you have a toothache, you have an elbow ache. Do you go? The first opinions of the Rambam said, yes, you would go and you would get it looked after. The Ramban, Nachmanides, said, no, you don't. If it's only one part of your body, you can live with a sore elbow. You can live with a headache. You're not going to die. It's not life-threatening. You don't have to. But how do we know that the headache is not life-threatening? Maybe the headache is coming on. Maybe it's part of a stroke or a heart attack. Who knows? Well, how do we know? Maybe the toothache is so excruciating that you can't wait, you have to go to the hospital, you got to get it treated. In your opinion, and a rabbi would say, you'll suffer, you'll take a glass of vodka and you'll go after Shabbat. No, that's not the answer. So the answer is, they brought forth the idea of eyesight. And they said, what about the case, this was brought to Rav Moshe Feinstein. What about the case of the man who came forward and said that he was having flashing in his eyes? He's describing it. Now, we know that to be a detached retina, but they didn't use the word detached retina, but that's through the scientific research going back in time, that's what it seemed to have been. So there was flashes going on, and the person was saying, should I go to the hospital to get this detached retina repaired? Because, you know, if you don't look after a detached retina right away, it's finished. You could lose your eyesight forever. It's got to be looked after right away. And Ramban said, no, it's only one eye. You have two eyes. We're not saving your life. It's one eye. You know, you'll still be able to have Shabbat and see and read a bracha and have Kiddush and do whatever you want with one eye. What do you care about one eye? Don't go, don't violate Shabbat. You have two eyes. And then it was brought forward and said, well, how does that make sense? What if you had already lost one eye in the war, and now your other eye is flashing and you have a detached retina, and you got to run to the hospital? Nachmanides would say, you don't need your eyes. You forget about it. It's only one part of your body. It's not your whole body that's suffering. So you shouldn't violate Shabbat. We know that, of course, to be not true. It's not what we follow. We follow that you, of course, run. Why? So they have to find a way to attach it to the Talmud. Every answer, Noreen, has an answer, not by Marshall Loomer. We don't care what Marshall Loomer says. We care about what the rabbis say, our sages, our scholars. And what the rabbis say is that you go because originally it was thought that somebody who was blind was exempt from mitzvot. Did you know that? According to the Torah, if you were, you could learn something today. You were blind, you were exempt from the performance of mitzvot. Because what's the point of you lighting Shabbos candles? You can't even see the light. You can't see the light. What bracha can you say? Lahadlik ner, to light the ner. The ner, you don't see any ner. What's the point of you doing saying Havdalah? You can't see the light. Hamavdil ben kodesh l'cho, it's separated from light and darkness. La Yehudim hayta ora, there's no light. Isaac suggests you can feel the heat. Well, not according to the rabbis, it's not good enough. And they said that based on that opinion, that's the way it would be. But that's not what was decided among the rabbis later. What they said was, you run because, I love this. They say, because if you lose an eye, you will not be able to perform all of your mitzvot and have many Shabbatot. It's better to violate one Shabbos or two Shabboses or three Shabboses to make sure that in the future you have the opportunity to observe many Shabbatot. So if you were running to the hospital to save that eye, it's because you want to be able to do mitzvot. It's because you want to run to the hospital to get better so that you can go and you can say, now I can celebrate and observe and perform all the mitzvot for Shabbat. Now, this kind of ruling and this kind of thinking among the rabbis is really what we consider when we look at halacha. What about we talked about zooming, and we talked about zooming on the Seder. I mean, the Seder's coming up. And we talked about how the rabbis in the Sephardic community wrote a whole tshuva saying that it would be allowed in a time of need to connect the next generation who would not celebrate Pesach. So here's what happened. They said, well, it's okay to switch it on before Yontif so that people that would normally come together would be virtually together. Obviously, these rabbis aren't technical wizards, because I don't think you can really set it on before, and they probably never used it. The other thing is even if you could set it on, you'd still be activating something. You know, one of the issues with using a microphone on Shabbat, you know, there were Shabbat microphones that were Paskin that you could actually use. Of all the systems out there, the Beth David system is halachically actually as close to what you could get to being a kosher Shabbat microphone compared to the other synagogues in Toronto. Why do I say that? Because we're cheap. We bought a system 45 years ago, and Marshall Loomer has been patching it. I don't know if you know this. I've been looking after that system since 2001. I've done all of the babying on that system. When a component's needed repaired, I brought somebody in and fixed that component. We never replaced only one part, only one small amplifier. That's the original system from the last renovation, which was done in 1999 or whenever they did it that first time. And that's how old that sound system is. Beth Emeth, I'll say this with great love and respect because Rocham is here, Grisha never complained about the sound system. He used it for what it was, and he used it, and that was it. After he retired, every chazan, every montik and donnerstick, I need a better amplifier, I need more speakers, I need more this, I need a better microphone, I need another this, I need another monitor, I need two monitors, I need an amplifier. Our system, as good or as bad as it is a system that's been there since I came. But what happens? Why do I say it's as kosher as possible? Because when I sing through the microphone, there are no LED lights that come on. I'm not signaling to an electronic mixer that lights are going brrr, brrr, going up to the red, to the green, to the red. Now, since we've installed live stream, that's a whole different thing. Our live stream system is not a Shabbos kosher system, I can tell you, because when I sing through the live stream, there are lights being activated. But our actual in-house system is not. So when you're on Zoom and you talk, I'm talking right now, probably talking too much. My box is lighting up as I talk. That means every time my voice activating this, it's intentional. Remember we talked about something you do b'di'evet or something you do lechatchila. This is a lechatchila. I'm teaching, I'm talking through the Zoom, the microphone's activating a light. Now, what Zoom should do is they should give us a Shabbos mode on Zoom. I'm going to write to them and ask them, can they install a Shabbos mode? You know why? On our refrigerators, often we have a Shabbos mode. If you hold down the ice maker button and the temperature button simultaneously at the same time for 5 seconds, your light on your fridge will go out and the compressor will stay on low and keep running through Shabbat. If it's a GE for sure. Why? Because there's these hidden Shabbos modes. You can Google and see if your fridge has it. Unless your fridge is from the 1970s and then it doesn't have it. So what happens is, if there was a button that you could deactivate the Zoom lighting up, then it would be more kosher, more valid, because I wouldn't be activating a light when I'm speaking. So the rabbis didn't really understand, but they do understand basic electricity. So electricity on Yom Tov is considered what? Why can't we use electricity on a Yom Tov? What's the reason? What is the violation? Fire. The rabbis had to connect it to something, and they connected it to fire. They said that when you use electricity, it's considered like fire. And amongst all of the Sephardic poskim that are led mostly by, at that time, the chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Uziel, and then there was the chief Ashkenazi rabbi, who was Rav Kook. According to the Sephardic Rabbanim, including Rav Mashash, many of them considered electricity to be exactly like fire, unlike the Ashkenazi Rabbanim, of course they have to have a different opinion, who said, according to the Sephardic rabbis, switching the computer on Yom Tov is acceptable. It's like transferring fire from one place to another. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It's like transferring fire from one place to another. If you light a yahrzeit light, a candle, a 48-hour candle, a 72-hour candle, before Yom Tov, you could take a piece of paper, light the paper from the yahrzeit candle, and just take that fire over to your gas stove, and you could light your gas stove. You could light a cigarette. I don't promote smoking, or a cigar on Yom Tov. You could light your barbecue, and you could barbecue on Yom Tov. And so, what's he doing? He's barbecuing on Yom Tov. Yeah, because you transferred fire. You took the fire from the yahrzeit candle, you went over to the barbecue, you lit the barbecue. You can't turn off the barbecue until Yom Tov's over, so you have to turn it down on very low, but you could light it. So they're considering, according to the Sephardic rabbis, that switching on the computer is acceptable because it's just like transferring fire from one place to another. But the Ashkenazi rabbis, big surprise, they disagree. They don't agree with that approach. And they said, since we're talking about a mitzvah here, a commandment, it's okay to be lenient, even switching it on. But in this case, there's room for leniency. And they continued in the tshuva to say, of course, we are not going to permit switching it on, but switching it on before Yom Tov is okay, and therefore the use of electricity is set aside as far as the Sephardic poskim are concerned. Well, there's a whole different approach between the Ashkenaz. Very often, I wish I was following the Sephardic poskim, but we're not supposed to pick and choose teams. It's not like a baseball trade where you're playing for the Yankees and you want to go over to the Blue Jays. Or vice versa. You're not supposed to say, I like the leniency for glass on Pesach. You can kosher. I like the leniency for the Sephardic on opinion on eating rice on Pesach, and Kitniyot. I like the Ashkenazi approach better when it comes to this, so I'm going to pick and choose. You're either on the Ashkenazi team or you're on the Sephardic team. A husband cannot take on the practices of his wife, but a wife can take on the practices of their husband. So if a husband is Dutch and he only waits 1 hour between meat and dairy, and the wife can adopt that, and she can say, I'm going to also now wait an hour. It's a wonderful thing. My daughter married a Dutch person, and my grandchildren can have ice cream 1 hour after having chicken. For me, it's foreign when I see it. I look at it, I go, I'm not used to this, 1 hour business. But for people who are in that culture, it's not foreign. So some people are obviously going to object. If you speak to some, the Haredis in the Ashkenazi world, they're not zooming on Yontif, I can tell you. And they're going to say, it's not a Shabbos Dika thing to do. Turning on your computer and using it. It's not in the spirit. We've heard that so many times. Why don't we do this? It's not in the spirit of Shabbat. Who says? Maybe in my spirit, maybe I think it's wonderful to it's like the guy who goes golfing every Shabbos. He wants to go. He says, look, your way of resting on Shabbos is to go to shul and have a kiddush, and my way of resting is to go to the golf course. I prefer it. Who am I to tell him how to enjoy his Shabbos? In Israel, what's the Shabbos thing to do? They go to the beach. It's the best place to be. Everybody goes to the beach on Shabbat. So therefore, if you're turning Yontif into a weekday experience, well, think about that. Just because the Yontif is on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and it's not on Shabbat, it's still Yontif. You do want to distinguish between Yontif and a weekday. It should feel like a Yontif. It should feel a little bit happier, a little bit different. So in this case, it's for performing a mitzvah. We're going to set aside the consideration. So finally, the rabbi said this regarding the Zoom business. And then we're going to wrap this up, and this ends this. They said, if we permit Zoom in this case, perhaps people will do it for other occasions. And that's what we're facing now. They opened up the floodgates. They said that last year, go ahead, do it, so your kids can see the grandparents, and you'll do it. The people aren't going to listen to the rabbis now that are going to say, well, now you can't do it. If I said to you on the third Shabbat in Shvat, once a year, you can watch TV and play the radio. You're going to say, well, if I can do it on the third Shabbat of Shvat, why can't I do it on the fourth Shabbat of Shvat? Why do I have to follow, like, you're allowing me to do something, why can't I do it all the time? So the bottom line, so everyone realizes that the leniencies is for one mitzvah, the purpose of being family together, so have no fear. They said Pesach is a very special holiday, and reading of the Haggadah, and very important in retaining a connection and keeping the family together in a spiritual sense. And they said it will also go very far. And this is the most important sentence in the whole tshuva, I think. It will go very far in relieving the grandparents of depression from being apart. Well, now they're going past all of the electrical reasons. They waited until the last sentence to say the grandparents will become depressed. Depression is an illness. When you're tying an illness into something, you can stretch the laws and stretch the rules. And I have to tell you, I speak to so many people on the phone that have been very depressed. And they're alone. And thank God that we've had this way of connecting, because if this would have happened, I don't know how many years ago, we'd all be sitting at home and it would bubble schmubble. We'd be all alone making each other mishiga, like I talk to my dog. You once in a while, you want to have a human being. I went for the first time in 2 years this morning. I ran after the minyan for a quick tennis game with Chazan Moses. We had a quick game and then I ran back to do this, and then the rest of the day is working. And I was talking to him, and I saw people there from our shul, from Beth David, and I hugged them when I saw them. And it was the first time, like, I haven't hugged anybody for 2 years. You know, I miss that, to see a person, to be together. So when the rabbis finish off the last pasuk by saying, we're going to relieve grandparents of depression, I think that's a pretty good reason. Bottom line, the Sephardic rabbis are lenient in this published tshuva in joining together for Leil HaSeder. That was then. I want to know what's going to happen in the future and how that will affect the changes coming forward, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are going to Zoom always from now on at the Seder. Maybe not with their grandchildren, because their grandchildren can come, but maybe with somebody who's in university and can't come home because they have exams that week. You know, Tristan, my stepson, has exams that whole week. So Tristan can't come. He can't come, and he's in Ottawa. And he already asked, can I please Zoom with the family Seder so I could at least be part of it? He's going to have food. He'll have his Kiddush cup. We're going to send him a small Seder plate. He'll have everything he needs and be part of it. How do you say no to someone? It's very difficult, right? So, you know, what would a frum person say? Better you should not be with your family and go and be with some other people as long as you're with people for a Seder. And I think that that's good too, experience other people. But if somebody isn't comfortable doing that, or if somebody is immunocompromised, let's use that for an example, and their health is at risk, and they don't want to, they're not ready to venture out, there's still plenty of COVID around, then I respect that if they want to Zoom with another family and be part of that. So the rabbi suggested turn your Zoom on before Shabbat or before Yontif and leave it on and be part of that. So I would think that that's kind of like a timer situation in a way. So going back a step, when we talked about timers and what could be done, what are the problems to deal with, let's say, a Shabbos or a Yontif timer? And let's go back in history before they were digital, where you could set them up to come on and off and off and on. Sometimes I set them off and I don't even do it correctly, and the lights are coming on and then off and on. And what does Isaac say here? Isaac Spindel's here with us online, and he says, hopefully the rabbis will finally understand that electricity is not fire or even like fire, and things will change. Very interesting. So there is a rabbi who already brought that forward, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, but he didn't quite win the argument. You know, and a lot of his tshuvas were published posthumously. So when Rav Shlomo Zalman passed away, his family collected and found all the things that he would answer, and they published books. But I'm always a little bit weary, I don't know if that's the word, not weary. I'm always a little bit skeptical when I'm reading a tshuva that was published by a family and not published by himself, because it may not be a tshuva that he wanted to be published. It was his thinking, but maybe not something that he wanted to put out there. But nevertheless, he believed that electricity, especially AC current, certain current should be definitely allowed, but AC current was always there in the walls. It's there already. The word is leery. Yes, thank you, Bernie. See, I need a PhD to tell me how my English should be. Thank you. No, it's true. So it's a question of the electricity. They said a DC current, which is a direct current, will eventually run out. Like a battery should be allowed on Shabbos, because it's like lighting a Shabbos candle. It doesn't burn forever. It goes out. Once it runs out of wax, it runs out. Once it runs out of oil, it runs out. Once the battery runs out of power, the light goes out. The rabbis don't say to use it, but that would certainly be, if you had to go to the bathroom on Shabbat in the dark to the outhouse 6 blocks away, and there's wild animals and behemoths and chayas out there, I would take a flashlight with me and turn it on with a DC current because I don't want to get eaten by a bear. There's also the word wary, Isaac says. You see, another PhD. All these brilliant, I got all these minds here between David and Isaac and Bernie, and there's too many smart people in the room. All of you, actually. So, and what about Ava? There's another professor in the room who finds me, I think, entertaining. Anyway, let's go forward a step. What happens is when they use the word something being Shabbosdik, they're talking about something that might use a lot of noise, right? Well, how about a musical apparatus? We'll call it a kli shear. A kli is a utensil, right? Like a kli you eat with, you cook with it. A kli shear for song. What about the tuning fork? You know, there were Orthodox rabbis that told chazanim and shuls, and they were completely out of line. And they said, you can't use a tuning fork to take your pitch to sing. It's a kli shear. It's a musical instrument. And many of the chazanim knew much more than many of the rabbanim, I can tell you. And it's not a kli shear. There was a whole tshuva written that a tuning fork only plays one note. Have you ever seen a musical instrument that only plays one note? Even a shofar, I can get two notes out of because of the harmonics. Do you know what a harmonic is? When you blow at a certain pressure, you get a low tone. If you blow really hard, it raises up and plays the octave up, the octave. And that harmonic can give you two tones from a shofar. A shofar could be considered a musical instrument. That's why we don't blow shofar in Shabbat, right? But a pitch pipe could be considered. I could take a pitch pipe and I could play it like a harmonica. It would be hard, but I could do it. You know, da 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 da. I could do something like that. But with a tuning fork, it's one note. Go play a song on a tuning fork. So it's not a kli shear. But a guitar would be a kli shear because it plays many notes. It's an instrument. You're not allowed to set up a musical apparatus. I can't even set it up. I can't say, you know, I'm not going to play it. I'm only going to tune it. I'm just tuning it. I'm going to just turn the tuning pegs and tune the guitar because after Shabbat, I want to play Havdalah. Once I light the candle and Shabbos is out, I want to sing and play Havdalah. So I'll just tune it on Shabbat. You're not even allowed to tune it. So they use the example. It could cause you to fix it, to make it work properly. So restringing a violin is not allowed. Playing a guitar is not allowed, or a banjo. You might want to fix it. And as far as a piano goes, you're not allowed to do something which strike, you know, a piano, I always thought it was a string instrument because it's got all those long strings, you know. It's not a string instrument. It's really a percussion instrument because when you press a key, it makes a hammer go and strike the strings. So because it's a percussion instrument, you can't play percussion on Shabbat. So there's a passage that later on the poskim, the rabbis, rely upon to make a conclusion. Speaking about his teacher, Rav Adler, he set up a fire burning on Friday in such a way that it had a very long fuse. Now, you got to think a little bit outside the box here, okay? Because this is a little bit mishiga what I'm going to bring forward here, but just go with me on it for a minute. He set up a fire burning on Friday in such a way that it had a very long fuse, a string, let's call it, a very long string. And it would keep on going until Shabbat morning. And the flame on the big long fuse, it sounds like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, you know, with the Roadrunner. The string would keep burning all through Friday night. And it would burn till 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. And at 6:15 in the morning, around then, the light on the string would just reach the stove, which was pre-filled with wood. I pre-filled the stove with wood, and the long fuse burns, and it gets to the stove, which happened to have a pot of water on top of the stove with raw coffee grounds already in it. And as the fuse eventually reached the stove, the wood caught fire and caused the coffee to brew. It caused the coffee to brew. Well, that sounds very familiar to cooking with an electric timer, doesn't it? The timer goes around, it turns on the coffee machine brews coffee, you know. Are we supposed to use an electric coffee machine that we set on a timer to make coffee? The answer is no. The answer is no. Many people do it because many people, especially in Israel, I hear, in the modern Orthodox world, they love their coffee. It's a very big deal. They got to have their coffee in the morning. And they don't want instant coffee, instant coffee. Now, I got used to instant coffee on Shabbat. That's what I drink on Shabbat. It's once a week. I actually like it because it's different. It has a different flavor. And I look forward to having that difference. It makes Shabbat difference. And you know, you put a little milk and a little sugar, it's not so bad. Some people drink it only. So the idea is that when you set a timer to come on so that it'll come on, or the long wick, which happens to get to the stove, which happens to set the wood on fire. It sounds like Chad Gadya, the dog that bit the cat, that bit the Malach Habavas came, you know. But the timer which goes around, which sets the coffee machine on, what am I doing to violate Shabbat? The timer did it. Not really. You're doing something with the intention of something that is a violation of Shabbat called bishul. Bishul is cooking. You can't set a timer to cook on Shabbat because you're cooking the coffee grounds. The coffee grounds are raw. Remember I said raw coffee grounds? So why is it? You know, many people, have you ever heard of kli shlishi? It's an interesting concept. Somebody wants to make a cup of tea and they want to observe Shabbat. So they take a tea bag, they put it into the cup, they take hot water, maybe they boil the kettle even. And Shabbos, they pour the hot water on top of the tea bag and you make tea and showing you have a cup of tea. Not allowed. First of all, you're not allowed to boil water on Shabbat. So what do you have to do? You get an urn. Now you're being Shabbosdik. You have an urn and the urn gives you hot water and you leave it on over Shabbat. Now you take the tea bag, you put it into the cup, you go over to the urn, you pour the water. No, you can't do that. If the tea bag's in the cup and you pour hot water onto it, you're brewing the tea bag, you're cooking the tea bag. It's not allowed. So what do? You're supposed to take a kli shlishi. You take a cup, you go and you get hot water out of the urn, and now you take that water and you pour it into a third cup, shlishi, and then it's a secondary transfer, so it's not called cooking. And then you take the tea bag and you put it into the cup. That's what the from world does to make a cup of tea. It's really not a big deal. But I see people doing it with coffee grounds. They want to do the right thing. And I'm not making fun of people that are trying to do the right thing, because anybody that's trying to be right and be Shabbosdik, it's wonderful. But I'm going to teach you something you didn't know. You don't have to do kli shlishi with coffee grounds. Has anybody heard of Rav Soloveitchik? Rav Soloveitchik said, it's nonsense. You don't have to. You can take the hot water right out of the urn, have the coffee grounds into the cup, and pour the hot water right onto the coffee grounds. Why? Because coffee grounds are already cooked. That's why they dissolve so quickly. They're freeze dried, or they're already gone through a process of being cooked. And there's an expression that's called
bishul achar bishul.
nachon. Nachon. Ein bishul achar bishul. Ein bishul acher bishul. There's no cooking after cooking. If something's cooked, it's already cooked. Now, there is a distinction between what they call lach and yavesh, between dry objects and between wet objects and how you reheat them. That's not for today. That's coming after another 30 shiurim that we do, because I'm going to do a whole course on separate. Remember we did kashrut before? We talked about things in kashrut. We're going to revisit kashrut later. We're going to talk, for those of you that can still stand me by then, we're going to do a whole series on Shabbat kashrut, because kashrut is kashrut, but then there's Shabbat kashrut. How do you reheat? What's dry? What's wet? Why do you even care? You don't care because you're not going to do it maybe, but you'll care because you'll be interested to know, oh, that's why people do that. Now at least I understand it. Noreen has a question.
Okay, so what you're talking about is like instant coffee, right?
Instant coffee.
Right, not
Instant.
coffee grounds.
No, not coffee
Because
ground.
we make filter coffee. You put the grounds in a filter and you pour the boiling water into the filter.
Good for you. Don't ask me if it's allowed, so that way you won't have
I'm
to
not
talk to-
asking you. I'm
Good.
telling you what we do.
Right. So I'm telling you, the Jewish people, I'm not telling you because I don't want
In
to
my
stop you.
my neighborhood.
In my holy neighborhood,
Yeah.
you're not supposed to do that because you're not even allowed to sift. You're not even allowed to sieve. You're not allowed to strain. There's issues of straining as well. But before we even get into that,
Okay.
you're cooking the grounds by pouring the hot
Yes.
water over it because the grounds are not yet cooked.
Cooked.
You see, that's why, as Rochama said, because Rochama's too smart, but ein bishul achar bishul, if something's already cooked, you're not recooking it already. So you don't really need kli shlishi for an instant cup of coffee.
It's
So-
also interesting, the instant coffee or the Nescafe. I always said the Nes is a cafe.
The nace is that it's cafe. That's beautiful. I never heard that. That's fantastic. Wow. Okay, that's very good. That's very good. By the way, there are some, I'll think of it as we go along. There's a brand of instant coffee. It costs you another $2 or $3. I'll tell you what it is. It's very fancy. You can find it in the store. I highly recommend it. The Russian community uses it a lot. And one of the persons taught it to me and told me how to make a great cup of instant coffee. There's a brand called Davidoff. You've heard of Davidoff products. They make cigars, they make this, they make that. There's a high-end instant coffee called Davidoff. It lasts a long time in the jar because you don't use that much when you use a spoon of coffee. And if you take Davidoff coffee and you put it into cold milk, you want a cooking lesson, you put it into the milk and stir it, dissolve it in the milk first. If you like milk in your coffee, maybe you like it black. And then pour the hot water into the milk mixture. It's wonderful. It's the best instant coffee I've ever had. But the Nes says that it's coffee. That's true. So, we talk about the issues of the rabbis that allowed timers, didn't allow timers, and can you set them in motion? Can you not set them in motion? What is allowed? What is considered Shabbosdik? I've talked about a rabbi who served for many years at the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, a teacher of medical ethics, but he also was paskening other things as well. He's a great rabbi. He was known as the Tzitz Eliezer. That's what he was called. The Tzitz Eliezer was named Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg. But if you say to Eddie Yeshiva Bocher, Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, they'll look at you like you're crazy. They don't even know who he is. But they say that Tzitz Eliezer, they'll know. So Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg changed his name to Waldenberg when he came to America, I think, and then to Eretz Yisrael. But his family name was actually Waldenberg, spelled with a V. And later on, it became Waldenberg. That's all the footnotes, it's sidelines, because if you ever read about him or hear about him, you'll say, oh, I heard about Rav Yehuda Waldenberg from Marshall. Now I know who they're talking about. So, okay. It's God calling, Bernie. So he's concerned about a different thing altogether. We talk about this issue with the timers, and he's concerned with something completely different. He thinks that the use of the timer to switch on an oven is indeed as the fuse case in Frankfurt. So in Germany, he said there was a whole different problem. In Frankfurt, Germany, they were very careful to put the raw coffee on the stove before Shabbat, he said, and he is afraid that people will take the raw chicken out of the refrigerator and place it in the oven on Shabbat. So they said, therefore, we're going to not allow something. You see, he said, there's no issue with raw coffee. I don't think that that should be an issue. If Noreen wants to make raw coffee on Shabbat and filter it through with a drip, let her do it. A bigazint, that should be allowed. But he says, no, I changed my mind. Not to you, Noreen, but to somebody else. I changed my mind, and you shouldn't do it. Because if I allow you to do this, then you're going to say, well, if I can make coffee and do that, you know what? I want to have, I'll put my raw chicken, the oven's already on. I left the oven on. I didn't turn the oven on. Leave the oven on at 350. Take the raw chicken out Shabbos morning, put the raw chicken in this oven. I didn't turn the oven on, and the chicken will cook. That's not allowed on Shabbat. You can't cook on Shabbat. So they said people, they're not smart enough. They'll get confused. They'll make a mistake. I don't trust the people. Remember we talked about trusting people? And I said to you, by the way, maybe somebody from COR is going to come and shoot me or chas v'shalom for saying this, but don't take my word for it. I'm not going to, Paula Epstein says coffee beans are roasted beforehand, but the problem is roasting is a process, and some people say, yes, you're right, that is considered, but then if they're roasted and then they're ground, you still have to filter through it. So you're not allowed to filter through it. That's one of the problems, is it's the issue of filtering as well, but it's true. So, you know, here's a custom where in France, we said people will buy any bread, even if it's not from a kosher bakery. Remember I said that last week? And then this week he's saying, yeah, but when I grew up in Germany, in Frankfurt, everybody could make coffee. I saw them doing it on Shabbat. But then he said, you know what? They did it because they set the machine up to come beforehand. And he says, uh-oh, if we allow them to turn it on beforehand, that's not good. Because somebody might take a chicken and put it in the oven and think that that's also okay. We can't do it. We got to stop it. It's very similar to you make a rule and you say you can Zoom this year on the Seder. It's a dangerous thing to do, because if I can Zoom this year, I can do it next year. If I can make coffee, I can make a chicken. So he gets concerned about this. And he said, even if the oven's already switched on, you would be guilty of cooking on Shabbos. We know that for a chicken. He says people are going to make a mistake. They're going to think that we're approving of a method that you can set a timer on to cook on Shabbat. We must go there. We must put a fence. We must say no. We have to prohibit it and say it's not allowed. Even if the people who say they'll be careful, I promise you I'll be careful. Sure. Like the person in Israel who has the Dud Shemesh and says, I'll remember to turn the hot water electricity element off before I use it on Shabbat, but they forget. It was a cloudy day, they turned it on. They forgot to turn it off. Their intention was good, but they forgot. And he said, we can't allow people to forget. That's why COR said you must have a hechsher for olive oil, even if it's brand new for Pesach. You must have a Pesach hechsher. Yet 10 years ago, they said, no, if it's a brand new 100% olive oil, you don't need a Pesach hechsher because it's only olive oil. And you can have olive oil. And then they reversed their opinion and said, no, we're not allowing it. Why? Because somebody said, Rabbi, look at this bottle. It says 100% olive oil on it. But it says using 100% olive oil. Well, yeah, they are. They're using 100% olive oil and they're mixing it with half canola oil or peanut oil or whatever, or avocado oil or whatever else is that wasn't checked. So the truth is that if you saw that the ingredients were only olive oil and there were no other ingredients in it, you could use it. But the rabbis were afraid. They're afraid that you're telling your congregation to buy olive oil. Now they're going to buy chametz, and they're going to have chametz in their olive oil, and they're going to use it. Well, they don't want to trust us. And there was a big controversy. And the controversy, surprisingly, because Jews, we never have controversies. They were trying to decide whether or not that after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the second temple, and after the Sanhedrin, whether rabbis will be able to change a law afterwards. It's interesting because, we're not supposed to just start changing things. We can adapt to the laws that are there, but how do you start changing things without a Sanhedrin? There's no Sanhedrin. There's no rabbinic court like that. So prohibitions were legislated by the Sanhedrin that will follow for generations. We didn't know how many generations. Maybe we thought we're going to build another Beit HaMikdash. Well, we're still waiting. I don't see one yet there. So the rabbinic law, which comes from that Sanhedrin that was, we as Jews have absolutely no authority. We have no power to create a new rabbinic law. We can take laws that are already there and we can adapt them, but we can't just take a law and change it. On the other hand, there are those who hold not only authority, but they hold that there's an obligation to build a fence around the law to prevent people from committing violations. So when COR says we're going to put a fence to protect people, do not buy an olive oil unless it says kosher Pesach on it. That's what I'm supposed to tell you, because that's the fence. If I tell you that and you buy it with a kosher Pesach symbol, then you know it's 100% kosher for Pesach. But what if the olive oil that's kosher Pesach is 250 milliliters and it's $10? And the olive oil that doesn't say kosher Pesach, that's sealed and brand new, is 500 milliliters for $4. You see what I'm saying? I find the whole issue with Pesach is the prices go up, the quality and the how much they give you goes down. It's a sad thing, I think, in our community. We should be putting a fence around trying to protect people that can't afford to buy food for Pesach, to encourage them, because there are people that say, I'm not going to buy all new spices or food for Pesach because, by the way,
it's a lose-lose situation.
It's a lose-lose. So that's why I tell people, if you want to buy a cinnamon and you want to use it from year to year, you're allowed to seal it up at the end of Pesach, close it, do not open it, put a saran over it, and then put the cap on it and keep it for next year. But don't keep it for 10 years because it won't become good. It won't be good anymore. So anyway, the idea is, before we finish up, is there's a whole machloket here now. The machloket. Remember we talked about Rav Avadia Yosef, and he said, you should be allowed to wear a battery-operated wristwatch on Shabbat. What's wrong with that? I got a Timex watch. It's a very fancy, expensive $11 Timex or whatever it is, and you can wear that on Shabbos. He says we can't prohibit wearing an electronic or battery-operated wristwatch because we are afraid that someone's going to press a button on Shabbos. And Rabbi Akiva Sofer said that he prohibited wearing electronic hearing aids on Shabbat, lest you come to play with the buttons. It's crazy. So you're going to tell people it's better you should be deaf for the whole Shabbos? But there is no prohibition. There's no law here because we are not the authority. We don't paskin, we don't create new laws. We only can take the laws that are there. We can't legislate a new rabbinic law since the Talmudic period. Ein koach beyadenu ligzor gzerot chadashot. Nachon, Rochama?
נכון מאוד.
Ein koach beyadenu ligzor gzerot chadashot. We don't have the power in our hands to make new laws. New chadashot, new laws, new gzerot. We don't have that power. So even though Rav Avadia Yosef and the Tzitz Eliezer were diametrically opposed, they were complete opposites to their thinking, in their opinion, as to whether we're allowed to introduce new laws regarding these kinds of matters. And by the way, they were very close and dear friends. They sat side by side in the on the Beit Din until Rav Avadia Yosef became the chief rabbi, and then he moved to a new chair. But they were very, very good friends. So, you know, arguing or not agreeing on something didn't mean that they didn't like each other or fought. They just happened to have a different opinion. You know, I mean, serving together on that kind of a serious rabbinic court on a Beit Din in the highest court of Israel certainly is a prestigious position, and they both held that. So we're beginning to see a structure of the machloket that came on here. So who cares about any of this? You're still here. You haven't tuned me out yet. So either you're just being very polite or whatever. So there's another rabbi who was a colleague to Rav Kook from Lithuania. And his name was Rav Pesach Tzvi Frank. And he said that he is concerned about a whole different problem that he said is that people aren't talking about. He said, you know, the problem of stirring the pot. By stirring in concept, you are pushing the uncooked food from the top down to the bottom. So let's say you have a pot of soup or stew and you're stirring it. He says you're moving things from the top to the bottom. Therefore, if you stir, you run the risk of pushing something that's uncooked on top down and guilty of cooking. That would be considered cooking on Shabbat. And he said you can't stir a pot on the source of heat. It's something that we don't allow. What does this have to do with anything? He said, Rav Frank says you have to make sure that a lid is tight, that if it's difficult to remove a lid, you'll remember not to stir. So now you put a tight lid on a pot to remind you can leave it on there so you can take some out to eat it, but not to stir it. It's a reminder. He says, but he says he is of the opinion that it's permitted to put a timer on before Shabbat to come on, cook on Shabbat, as long as you do not stir. But not everybody agreed with this. All the rabbis fought about this as a sideline, from the Chazon Ish to Rav Avadia Yosef to the Minchas Yitzchak. They all had a different opinion, and I'm not going to get into that, but I'll talk about one, because if I get into that, that's a whole nother shiur. But I'll go forward on this issue, and I'll say that as far as using a timer to initiate a timer to cook on Shabbat, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to set a timer to start to cook something. Now, you can have a timer to stop cooking something on there, to come off. You can have a timer set before Shabbat to do different things, but not to initiate a brand new cooking. In the Talmud, there was a guy named Ben Drusai. We talked about that. And Ben Drusai was a bandit. He was a robber, a thief, a ganaf, a crook, whatever, you know. And he always had to eat on the run. And they said when something is considered machal ben drusai, it was at least 1/3 to half cooked. They argued about whether 1/3 or 1/2, but somewhere in there. So in other words, if you put the Shabbat starts at 6 o'clock, let's say, and you put something on to cook at 5, by 6, it's pretty much cooked. It's 3/4 cooked. If it's already more than 1/3 cooked, you can continue that cooking process through. If the chicken is 3/4 cooked or 1/3 cooked or half cooked, it's good enough. It's called machal ben drusai. Then you can let it finish cooking, but not something raw. You can't set the timer to start a raw cholent on Shabbos morning so that it's ready for later. It has to already be machal ben drusai. It's got to be mostly at least 1/3 cooked already before the onset of Shabbat. So what about using that Shabbos timer for other gadgets in the house? For example, you want to watch the big game. The big game is on and you want to see it. or even you want to record it, can you set your apparatus to record so you can watch it after Shabbat? So as a side story, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, he remembered watching man landing on the moon. And he said that the Ramban was right about the moon, and the Rambam was wrong. Rambam said it was a spiritual substance, and the Ramban said it was a physical item. The moon was a physical thing. Don't forget, back then, they thought they were just saying a reflection. Maybe the moon isn't really there. Maybe it's just a reflection. Rambam didn't necessarily think that the moon was a physical thing. He thought it was a spiritual thing. And he said, we notice in passing that he was watching it on Shabbos. When Rav Kamenetsky wrote in his book, in his first volume, The Landing on the Moon, later on in his later volumes, that sentence was taken out by his family when it was republished in the second and third edition after he died, because they didn't want people to think that Rav Kamenetsky was watching TV on Shabbos. How was it that Rav Kamenetsky was watching TV on Shabbos? He went next door to his neighbor's house, and they weren't Jewish, and he watched their TV, which already happened to be on. Now, a firm person would tell you that's not very Shabbosdik, but to Rav Kamenetsky, all of a sudden the rules are being bent here a little bit. He's watching somebody else's TV that happened to be on. He didn't say, oh, I'm walking to their house to get a glass of water. Oh, the TV happens to be on. Oh, the man is landing on the moon. Give a kick. He didn't just happen to walk into his house. He walked into the house and he was watching TV intentionally. And this was only published in the first edition, in his commentary on the Torah. In later editions, it was taken out by the family so people wouldn't think that he came to watch TV on Shabbat. The reason I'm saying this is because even rabbis, even great rabbis like Rabbi Kamenetsky, are human beings. They're people too. How often is the first man going to land on the moon? Ever in 1969? One time. And he didn't want to miss that. He wanted to see it. He's a person, as my mother would say, he's a people too. You know what I mean? He's a person too. He's a poison. He deserves, so he wanted to see it. So we're going to talk about next time the issue of timers and why we don't use them today, and why I think it'll come for radios and stuff like that. More modern technology next time, but we're going to stop. But there's something even more important that I want to bring up when we meet together next time. And it's not about the old manual timers, because they're really gone by the wayside. You're not allowed to change a timer on Shabbat. You can't change the inevitable. You can't say, oh, now that it's Shabbat and the timer's set that the light will go off at 3 o'clock, I'm going to pull the pin out and make it go off at 6 o'clock. You're not allowed to do that. Once it's set, it's set. But what I want to talk about is something even different. It's about time zones. You already know the answer, but you don't know how we got to the answer. And how we got to the answer is what we're here for. That's what it's all about. And that's the issue of time zones. Because somebody here said, oh, or was it the morning minion? And someone said, oh, it's such a time there, so we can, it's an hour before or an hour later. I said, if I'm living in New Brunswick, I moved to New Brunswick. So I'm going to move there because real estate's cheaper. I'm not missing anything. I could be on the shiur. I could give you the class from New Brunswick. I could come to the Zoom on New Brunswick. You're not, but I have to, they said it's an hour later. I can sleep in an hour. What happens on Shabbat? I want to send an email, and Rabbi Isaac Spindel says July 20th, 69 was on a Saturday, a Sunday in our time zone. Yeah, but there are other time zones, right? So maybe it was For him, it was a Friday. So the issue is that, by the way, Isaac, I looked that up too, and I was questioning that too. I'm giving you the story, the footnote of what actually happened in the tshuva and why he took it out. So maybe in his time zone it was different, but I actually looked that up too and knew that. So what happens is you want to send. Let's talk about something we don't do anymore, a fax. Who faxes anymore? Does anybody use a fax? I think in hospitals they still use a few faxes, but Anna Bloom uses a fax. Anna, you're a dinosaur, but we love you. You keep using fax. No, you know what? You have to use faxes for many government things as well today. Here, Isaac says, but they landed on a Saturday, I think. Okay. Anyway, so David Goldberg is nodding his head, so we'll take that as a vote of confidence. But they proved the moon's tangibility. Okay. Anyway, he watched something on Shabbos. That's the story. So you want to send something, and here Shabbos is finished. But wherever you're sending it to, Shabbos is not finished. Can I, if my Shabbos is over, or how about this? Shabbos hasn't started on Friday, and I'm going to send an email to somebody where it's still Shabbat. Are you halachically allowed to do that? It's not Shabbat for me, but it's Shabbat for them. Can I send them an email on Shabbat? Well, the answer is yes, Noreen.
Okay, I don't know what your answer is, but I do know that frequently my frum sister-in-law who lives in Israel will send me an email that I get Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, but for you, you're even answering it on Saturday afternoon. So what's the difference?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I
Yeah.
know. The answer is, I'm joking with you, Noreen. The answer is, we all know you can't send something 100%. If it's not Shabbat for me, I can send you something if it's Shabbat for you. I'm not telling you, but we know that. That's the answer. No problem. The problem is getting there. How do we convince the rabbis? How do we get them to say that it's okay? So
Rabbi Shaim says it's okay. I asked him.
who said?
Rabbi Shaim.
Yes, well, you're right. Rabbi Shaim is 100%. You can do it. We know that. 100% you can do it. But how did the rabbis allow it? How did they paskin it that it was okay to go to a different time zone and do something? So we're going to talk about going all the way back to the Talmud and the original sources of where that whole tshuva came from and why they allowed it. I think it's actually a very, very interesting topic. And it'll allow some other leniencies for us. Just to give you the door opening for it, problem number one, there has to be a starting point wherever that is, where there's an international date line. And the question of sending, let's say, a fax or whatever it is, from one time zone, if it isn't Shabbos, to another time zone where it is Shabbos, becomes a topic among the rabbis. Can you send a fax from one location where it's Kedusha of Shabbat, and it hasn't started the Kedusha of Shabbat, to a country of a place where Shabbos has already started? So we have to think about that. And there is a source going back to the Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to bring it forward next week. And we'll talk about why the Shulchan Aruch says that this is permitted. Okay? So anyway, look, thank you for sharing time with me today, and let's join together again next week.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marshall,
Yes.
you may want to know that as a substitute for bubbly, that President's Choice puts out a sparkling flavored water in a number of different flavors. It's almost $1 cheaper per case, and it's very good. And
I'm
it's
going to
got
buy some.
and
I'll
it's got
try
a
it.
core on it.
I'm going to try it.
They
Good.
have cherry vanilla. They have cream. Wonderful flavors.
Wonderful. I'm going to get some. Listen, I'm getting tired of these flavors. It's time for a change.
Me too.
All right. Thank you, everyone. What a great group. I love seeing all
Thank
of
you very much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Marshall.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Marshall,
Yes.
What happened to the two furry pillows on the top of your foldaway bed?
I don't know. I'll have to ask Laura. Maybe she put them somewhere. Oh, they're in the closet.
Okay.
No, I'll bring them back. Next week, I'll wear it on my head like a strimel.
Or use it as a dust mop.
Or use it as a dust bun. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
everybody.
Marshall.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.